On February 26, 2022, just 2 days into Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the United States and the European Union made a move they thought would end the conflict. They decided to cut Russia off from SWIFT. This messaging network is the central nervous system of global money. It connects 11,000 banks across 200 countries, moving over $5 trillion. Every single day, cutting Russia off meant its banks couldn't send or receive international payments. No trade finance, no cross-border deals. Total economic isolation. The West called it the nuclear option of financial sanctions. The goal was clear: cripple the Russian economy, collapse the ruble, force Putin to withdraw. But 2.5 years later, something very different happened. Russia's economy didn't collapse. The ruble recovered. Russian trade continued, just not through SWIFT. They found other ways, and for the United States, a much bigger problem emerged. Dozens of other countries saw what happened, and they got scared. Because if America could cut off the world's 11th largest economy from the global financial system, it could cut off anyone. This wasn't the first time. In the last 110 years, a dominant financial power has weaponized the system 4 times, and every single time, the exact same pattern plays out. The dominant power uses its control as a weapon. Its targets find alternatives. Neutral countries get nervous and start hedging their bets, and in the end, the weapon loses its power, and the dominant power accelerates its own decline. Today, we're seeing this pattern play out in real time. America's use of the SWIFT weapon against Russia is triggering a chain reaction that data shows will end the dollar's reign as the world's reserve currency, and the clock is ticking. First, let's be clear. SWIFT isn't a bank. It doesn't hold or move money. Think of it as a global, secure messaging service for banks. When Bank A in New York wants to send $1 million to Bank B in Tokyo, SWIFT sends the encrypted message that says, "Transfer the money." The actual cash moves through other channels, but without that SWIFT message, nothing happens. Based in Belgium, SWIFT is technically neutral. But America holds the leverage. Most international transactions are in dollars and ultimately clear through New York. That means the U.S. Treasury can pressure SWIFT to disconnect banks or entire countries. We saw it work in 2012 against Iran. Cut off from SWIFT, Iran's oil exports crashed. Their economy shrank 9%. Inflation hit 45%. The sanctions forced them to the negotiating table. The weapon worked, or so it seemed. But Iran spent those years building workarounds, barter deals, crypto, non-dollar trade with China and Russia. They learned to survive with less SWIFT. The 2022 move against Russia was different. This was a major economic power, a top energy exporter. Cutting them off was a stark message to the world. Cross the U.S., and you lose access to the global financial system. To understand why this move was a strategic blunder, you have to look back. This financial weaponization playbook has failed for a century. Example 1. Britain, 1914. At the start of World War I, the British pound was the world's reserve currency. Britain froze all German assets worldwide, an unprecedented move. It hurt Germany badly. But neutral countries watched and thought, if Britain can seize German money, they can seize ours. They started moving reserves out of London, diversifying into gold and other currencies. New York banks gained massive business. Just 30 years later, at the 1944 Bretton Woods Conference, the dollar officially replaced the pound as the global reserve currency. Britain's weaponization started its own decline. Example 2. The U.S. and Iran, 1979. After the hostage crisis, President Carter froze $12 billion in Iranian assets. It worked to pressure Iran, but OPEC nations saw it and realized our dollar reserves in New York banks can be frozen with one executive order. They began quietly diversifying away from the dollar. The freeze worked tactically, but it planted the first seed of global distrust in the safety of dollar reserves. Example 3, 2014. After Russia annexed Crimea, the U.S. imposed sanctions but didn't cut off SWIFT. This was maybe the worst outcome. It signaled intent but gave Russia 8 years to prepare. And prepare they did. Russia slashed its U.S. Treasury holdings, built up massive gold reserves, and created its own SWIFT alternative called SBFS. They set up trade deals to use rubles, yuan, and rupees. By the time the 2022 sanctions hit, Russia was ready. And that brings us to 2022 and the 5-stage pattern that's unfolding right now. Stage 1. Dominant power controls the system. For decades, the U.S. effectively controlled dollar-based finance and SWIFT. Stage 2. It gets weaponized. February 2022, Russia is cut off from SWIFT and $300 billion of its reserves are frozen. Stage 3. The target finds alternatives. Russia pivoted fast. It used its own SPFS system, China's CIPS system, and settled trade in yuan, rupees, and rubles. By 2024, 40% of Russian trade was in non-dollar currencies. They proved you could survive outside the U.S. system. Stage 4. Neutral countries hedge. This is the critical, irreversible stage. It's not about Russia anymore. It's about every country that saw those frozen reserves and asked, could that be us next? The data is stunning. China accelerated its de-dollarization, cutting U.S. Treasury holdings and building up gold. Its cross-border interbank payment system, CIPS, grew from $12 trillion in 2022 over $27 trillion in 2023. Saudi Arabia, a U.S. ally for 80 years, announced it would accept yuan for oil sales and later joined the BRICS bloc. India now trades with Russia in rupees. The UAE uses dirhams. Brazil and Argentina are discussing a common currency. Central banks worldwide are buying gold at the fastest rate in 50 years. Why? Because gold can't be frozen. They're not doing this to be anti-American. They're doing it for simple self-preservation. Stage 5. The weapon loses power. This is where we are heading. The dollar's share of global reserves has fallen from 71% in 1999 to 58% today. Its use in trade is dropping even faster. SWIFT is still big, but its monopoly is over. So, how long until the dollar loses its top spot? Look at history. Britain weaponized finance in 1914 and lost reserve status by 1944, a 30-year decline. The U.S. pulled the trigger in 2022, but today, technology moves faster. China's CIPS system scaled up in years, not decades. Based on the current speed of de-dollarization, analysts estimate the dollar will lose its dominant reserve status in 15 to 25 years. That puts the shift somewhere between 2037 and 2047. The dollar won't disappear. We'll move to a multipolar world. Maybe the dollar at 40%, the euro at 25%, the yuan at 20%, with gold and other currencies making up the rest. But for America, the consequences are profound. The exorbitant privilege of printing money to fund deficits and import cheap goods. That ends when the world doesn't need your dollars anymore. Interest rates rise, budgets get squeezed, and the American standard of living adjusts to a new, less dominant reality. So who wins in this new world? China is the obvious beneficiary. Its yuan gains reserve status. Its CIPS system becomes the new SWIFT. It didn't have to defeat the U.S. militarily. It just waited for America to overplay its hand. BRICS nations, now including Saudi Arabia, Iran, UAE, Egypt, gain leverage and autonomy. Gold and alternative payment systems win big as trust in the dollar system fractures. And the losers, the United States loses its foundational pillar of global power. American consumers face higher prices as the dollar's purchasing power falls. SWIFT itself becomes just one network among many, not the network. The SWIFT weapon looked powerful in February 2022, but financial weapons are like nuclear options. You can really only use them once. After that, everyone builds shelters. Russia built its shelter. China built a bigger one. And now half the world is moving in. The U.S. could have maintained dollar dominance through economic strength and stable leadership. Instead, it chose coercion. It worked in the short term against smaller nations, but against Russia, it triggered the very pattern that has ended financial empires for a century. The decline isn't here yet, but the pattern is locked in. The clock started ticking in 2022. 20 years from now, historians will likely look back and say that was the moment, not when America was defeated by a rival, but when it weaponized the very system that gave it power and began its own financial surrender.